Okay, so we're back to Yore Deah. This time we're beginning Hilchos Mikvaot, Siman Reish Aleph, right after Hilchos Niddah. And the primary reason why it's after Hilchos Niddah is because obviously it is very important for a Niddah to immerse herself in a kosher mikveh if she wants to be muteres lebala, she wants to continue a normal life with her husband. But mikveh is also important for other reasons. During the time we had a Beis Hamikdash, we were dealing with the halachas of Tumah and Tahara in general, not just about people, but about kelim. Today we don't have to concern ourselves about kelim that are tmeim, but we do use a mikveh for kelim that were purchased from a goy, depending on the type of kelim, which Zat Hashem I think we'll cover as well. So we've covered chatzitzas, and we'll be covering chatzitzas for kelim as well. But mikvois really involves a lot of detail concerning the engineering of it, which we'll maybe get into a little bit. What goes into the design. There's a lot of chumras. You may notice that certain mikvois in town, either here or elsewhere, are stricter than others in the way they make the mikveh according to higher standards. And that is to try as best as possible to make it kosher for anyone, regardless of how strict they are, that they shouldn't come and say, well, this is not good enough for me, and so forth. So in mikvois, if a mikveh is done properly, under the auspices of someone who's familiar in how to make it, then hopefully it will be a very good mikveh, according to the highest standards, that there shouldn't be any suffix whatsoever. There are places where it is more difficult to make a mikveh than others because there's no rain. So we'll be learning all the halachas, Mitzvah Hashem, in the coming weeks, on how to make a mikveh, what invalidates a mikveh. Today will be more of an introduction as to what a mikveh is, as opposed to a mayon, a spring. When you learn Mishnayos, mikvois is a Mishnah only, there's no Gemara to it. And there's some very interesting details about all kinds of liquids that can be included or excluded from a mikveh. What disqualifies a mikveh? What if some paint fell into the mikveh? What if it got discolored? So a lot of these halachas are relevant, and we'll be covering it here in the Shuchan Aruch, but the rest of it is in the Mishnayos. You're welcome to learn the Mishnayos. It's customary to learn those Mishnayos for your side, the Ilu Nishmas, in memory of somebody who is deceased. So here we're being introduced to the general concept of a mikveh, because mikveh is what it takes to make an individual who's tameh tahar. This is what will be required, is a mikveh, a body of water. But when we talk about a body of water, what do we mean? Do we mean an ocean? What about a river? What about a swimming pool? What about a jacuzzi, a shower that just comes down at you? A lot of water comes down at you. So what exactly is meant? Or does it really have to be rainwater, as traditionally we know a mikveh to consist of? Well, how much does it have to have? And is there a difference, midaraisa or midarabanan, as far as the size of the mikveh? Because a little bit we did see in Hilchos Niddah that the height of the mikveh should go above the belly button area. You know, a woman needs to fully immerse herself in the mikveh so that the water should cover her completely. And with Niddah, remember, it's an Isur Koros. It's very, very sensitive. It has to be done 100% right. As we will soon see, that there is a lot of chumras, there's a lot of things that will invalidate it. And for Niddah, that will make a big difference. Whereas for men today, there's no obligation for them to go to mikveh. I mean, customarily we go Erev Yom Kippur, or before the holidays. Some people go every Erev Shabbos, and some, of course, go every day, which is beautiful. It's definitely a good thing. It definitely adds to the tahara, to the kedusha of the individual, but it's not an obligation. During the time of Beis Hamikdash, when we have all kinds of tmeim, including a zav and a zava, And sometimes you needed the Efer Pora Aduma as well, the ashes of the red heifer, depending on the type of Tuma. There's different levels of Tuma, and there's also different levels of Tahara. As we will soon see, a mikveh of water is one level, or one degree of Tahara. There is something higher, which is called a mayan, a spring. There is lower and there is higher. But in general, we know that water is what it takes to cleanse one from Tuma. We have that on a daily basis when we wake up in the morning, when we wash our hands for a smaller level of Tuma, impurity, on the fingernails, at the extremities, the fingers, where the main Tuma is, before we touch any parts of our body. So that we're somewhat also familiar with. And obviously, a kohen has to be careful, even though there's no Efer Paraduma. He has his own unique Isser of becoming Tameh to a mace, to a dead individual. But as far as dead animals and all kinds of nevelas and all kinds of other situations that bring about Tuma, even though we try to be careful with it, but there's no requirement for us to go into the mikveh if in fact we didn't come in contact with Tuma. Whereas Tumas Balkeri was something much more of an issue in the past, and even Ezra, which we discussed briefly, was Mesaken at one time. Today we don't have the Takanas Ezra, we don't have even those men who saw Keri, and they are unclean, even though it's a good thing for them to bathe, to immerse themselves in the mikveh, it's not an obligation. Alright, so before we read the words of the Mechaber, we need to know a little bit about what a mikveh is and what the differences between a mikveh and a mayan is. A mayan being a spring. In the Torah it says, Ach ma'ayan ubor mikveh mayim yiyeh tahor. So the moment you see the word ach, which is but, you know it's telling you something. You know that there's something different about a ma'ayan, because the word ach is associated with ma'ayan, with a spring. But in that pasuk, in Parsha Shmini, it's telling us about a ma'ayan ubor mikveh mayim, or a pit, a body of water that contains a certain amount of water, which is different than a spring, which is continuous, a continuous flow. Yiyeh tahor. And the proper interpretation of that pasuk is that is how an individual whose tummy becomes tahor. It could happen through a mayan, it could happen through a bor mikveh. What is the Torah telling us this ach for? Not only is mayan here different, but the group, this group of mayan, bor mikveh, is exempt from becoming tameh because it's connected to the ground. So if we're talking about the Torah in discussing those things that can become tameh, it's telling us, however, the following items, this group of body of waters, whether it's a mayan or a mikveh, is exempt, it's connected to the ground. Those waters do not become tameh. Otherwise, imagine somebody going into the mikveh. Why does he not make the waters of the mikveh tameh? So that which is connected to the ground, it's not in a man-made object, which is another important detail which we will discuss, but it's into the ground, it does not become tameh. And besides this, it's telling us that mayan is different, and that as a result of immersion in these bodies of water, yiyeh tahor. This is the way one becomes tahor from all kinds of tumas. So the drasha in Torah's Kahanim is as follows. I would think that since mayan and mikveh are mentioned in the same pasuk, a mayan, a spring that is metar bechol shehu, all you need is a little bit of water coming out from the spring for it to bring about tahara. Perhaps a mikveh would also be metar bechol shehu. Would it be enough if you just had a little bit of water in the mikveh to render an individual or an object tahor? So comes along the word ach, which which is right next to Mayan, and tells us no. Ach Mayan meaning a Mayan will be metaher b'chol shehu. A Mayan is a higher level than a mikveh in that it does bring about tahara even with a little bit of water. It does not require the 40 se'ot, which we're going to learn about in a mikveh. So that's already one benefit or one difference between a Mayan and a mikveh, is that a Mayan, from this drasha in Torah's Kohanim, teaches us that only a Mayan is metar b'chol shehu with a little bit. A mikveh does require memsel. Well, what else? Are there any other differences? Yes, I would think, just like Mayan, which we happen to know from elsewhere, that it's metaher bezoichalin. A spring can be metaher even though it's continuously running water. It's not sitting. I would think perhaps that kind of a situation would be acceptable even with a mikveh. Af mikveh metaher bezoichalin. Even a mikveh, if the water is just going through it, running through it, it would be okay. Talmud Loimer, we learned Ach Mayan, only Mayan is metaher bezoichalin. Mikveh can only be metaher be'ashborin. So these are two concepts that it's good to familiarize ourselves with. Zochalin, running. Ashborin, sitting. Yeah, you go to a mikveh, you see the waters are sitting. They're not going anywhere. They're not moving. There's no current. Whereas with a spring, you have the waters going through continuously. What's the best example of a spring that's being used today to immerse in? It looks like a mikveh, but has the din of a mayan, the mikveh of Dari. Best example. Whereas the water, have you ever been there?
Yeah, cold.
Cold, yeah. So you can see the water coming out of the wall, and that's coming from melted snow, or from some spring, from somewhere, underground, continuously. So that body of water, which, by the way, can accommodate up to about 4 people, there's not that much room there, it's small, but it's big enough, is transformed into a mayan. It's not just a mikveh. It's better than a mikveh. In other words, in two, at the very least in these two criteria, it's different in that you wouldn't need as much, lechatchila, for certain items at least. You wouldn't need as much. A mayan does not require as much water as a mikveh. Number 2, zoichalin would be fine, would be perfectly okay if the waters are continuing. With a mikveh you can't have that. When we talk about rivers, that's going to present a problem. Okay? So hopefully we'll get to that too today. So this is important to understand that a mayan and a mikveh are very different in these two respects. Number 1, a mayan does not need a lot to make something which is tameh tahor, even b'kol shehu. We will see that ultimately today, at least midrabbanan, we do require more. And number 2, a mayan is okay, bezoichalim, for the water to run through. They don't have to be ashborim, the waters don't have to be sitting. There's a third chalukah. There's an additional difference, and that is mayim chaim. And that's not the seltzer they sell in New York that I'm talking about. Mayim chaim. Mayim chaim is living water. What's living water? Mayim chaim. In other words, we're obviously talking about spring water because this is alive. It is emanating from a source continuously. But in order for something to be truly mayim chaim, other than being from a spring, it has to be cold. It cannot be warm. And it has to be sweet waters. It cannot be salt water. So otherwise, if it's salty and warm, it's called the mayim mukim. It's in the Mishnah Mikvaot, which is not as good. Now, where do you need mayim chaim today? You don't really need mayim chaim. But you would need it if you were dealing with a metzora, where one of the birds that is slaughtered has to be slaughtered onto mayim chaim. You would need it with kiddush mechatas, when you're preparing the mechatas, the waters with the ash from the red heifer. You would need mayim chayim. And of course you would need it for a zava. Mayim chayim is required. So today we don't have any concerns about having mayim chayim, but that's just another difference between a plain mayim versus mayim chayim, which is also mayim but with additional conditions.
We still speak of mayim chayim though.
Oh, of course, yeah. Yeah. So everyone else, whether it's a zava, niddah, and all other tmeim, however they became tmeim, for the most part, they don't need this mayim chayim. They would be just fine with the mikveh. Okay. Now we need to understand a little bit about amounts. We know water can do it. Somehow that H2O can take away the tumah on an individual. But not just any H2O. It has to be done in a certain way. For example, in the morning, how do we wash our hands? Alternating. And it's 3 times. Somehow that's a magical number. 3. Somehow alternating is what does it. Not when you're washing for bread, for example. You don't need to have 3, even though some people do 3. 2 is enough. You came out of the restroom, you don't really have to do it that way, 3 alternating. People do it anyway. You don't even need to really do it with a keli when you're coming out of the restroom. You could just rinse your hands underneath the faucet. That requirement for the morning is much more stricter in order to remove that tumah, in order to do it right. So in the same way that it has to be done in a certain way, it also has to be a certain amount. So in Parshas Metzora, where the pasuk of Berachatzu b'mayim is quoted, the Rambam brings down that it is understood from that pasuk that Berachatzu b'mayim, that's a binyan av for every tameh. That pretty much establishes the rule or the standard for every tameh, that he remains in his tumah until he's toivel. Okay, but it's also brought down in the Braisa, in Chagiga, Verochatz b'mayim, which is a different pasuk, that mayim is what? Is mei mikveh. That mayim we learn out from another pasuk is mei mikveh, but it adds the words, not just that it has to be done in mei mikveh, that it's called besoroi. That when you do wash yourself in this mayim, or the mei mikveh, you want to make sure that you wash kol besoroi. In other words, it has to be water, not just the waters of a mikveh. It has to be waters that the entire body can be covered with. So here we see that the conditions are that it has to be a mikveh of water, and it also has to be sufficient water to cover the whole body. All right. How much are we talking about? Or what kind of a size of a mikveh are we talking about? So the Gemara says the size would be amal amo barum gimel amas. That's the size, the basic size, that will contain sufficient water to envelop an average human being. How much is that? Amo al amo, 1 by 1 by the height of 3. That's the translation of the words. Amo al amo barum gimel amos. Now we don't know anything about amos yet, but we have more or less an idea from other areas in halacha, measurements, that every amma has 6 tefachim. And every tefachim, every tefach is approximately 4 inches, give or take. But when you learn halachas, you will see that in certain areas of halacha we're more machmir, and in certain areas of halacha we're a little bit more mekel, as far as the requirement of amos and tefachim. Are we going to insist on 4 inches per tefach, and therefore 24 inches is going to make an amma? That's 2 feet. Or we're going to be more lenient, and say it's a little bit less. And usually, for the most part, most calculations that involve amos and tefachim do not amount to that. An amma usually is in the range between 21 inches to 23. But if we take that measurement, that size, of amo al amo at the height of 3, how much do we get? We get 40 se'ah, the Chachamim say. 40 se'ah. Well, that doesn't help too many people, because they don't know what a se'ah is. A se'ah is 24 lug. So if you have 40 se'ah, what's 24 times 40? 960. So we have 960 lug of water that are required for a kosher mikveh. Well, how much is that in liters or gallons? So there's different shittas, as usual. Famous sheet of the Chazon Ish, that lechatchila it should not be less than 750 liters.
That's a lot.
And definitely not less than 648. So it says 648 is his b'di'evet. But he says 750 is what you need. According to him, this is based on an amma that's 60 centimeters, I recall. Then we have the Shita of Rav Chaim Noah, the lechatchila 921.6 or 922 if you want to round it, liters, and at the very least, not less than 454.28, I think it is.
So he's higher
liters.
or lower?
Yeah, because of the variation. Rav Moshe Feinstein, interestingly, has 2 of his own shittas. One is earlier and one is later. In basing it on his famous 21.25 inches for the amma, that is how he came out originally, that the amma was approximately 21.25 inches in inches. Based on that, you arrive at 472 liters. Later on, since we're talking about mikvahs, especially mikvahs, he said to use an amma of 24 inches, which is the stricter variation of amma, which you come up with 680 liters. Actually, I'm sorry. In the original psak, he said to use 24 inches, which is 680, but later on he came out with a new psak of using an amma based on 24.5 inches, which would require 723 liters.
24.5?
Right. So this is for mikvahs, we're more machmir. So in his first psak, it was 21.25, but preferably 680. And in this later psak, 723 liters. Now, Americans are not familiar with liters, so Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky did us a favor and told us that it's approximately 200 gallons. A good kosher mikveh should contain at least 200 gallons of rainwater. Now, is that the case? No. Most mikvahs have a lot more than that. Once you make a mikveh, you're not going to stick to the minimum. Remember, people go in and out, and water
depends on the size of the body of the person.
Sure.
All numbers are accepted with respect to the average.
Yeah, we'll talk about that soon. That this will cover everybody. The question is, if somebody's smaller in stature can use less. That's where the question arises. Yeah, but we hold Lemaisa that the 40 se'ah is for everyone, small or tall. Now, mikvahs that are being built today have more than the 200 gallons, are larger to accommodate more people. And remember, you're going to have water being displaced, water being moved around, and continues to need to be replenished.
Persons in a mikvah also, no?
What is that?
You have several persons.
Exactly. So the mikvah is going to be bigger than the measurements or dimensions that I just mentioned. But this is the basic requirement. Amma berum amma, an amma by an amma, but the height of 3 would contain approximately this amount. Does it have to be this dimension? No. As long as you can cover the person, and as long as that amount is there, he would have to be laying down. Remember when we learned Hilchos Niddah, sometimes a woman would have to, be flat down for the waters to cover her completely. That's how the water is. It's not in a small area reaching a certain height. She would have to bend. She would have to be more careful then to make sure that the waters would cover her completely. So if that's the case, then that's what needs to be done, to bend. There are worse situations. People used to go and break the ice in the rivers in Russia to immerse in a mikveh. Tremendously cold, difficult, challenging, far away from home. because the survival of the Jewish people depended on mikveh. That's why they found this in Matzada too, of all things. A mikveh in Matzada, and it wasn't easy to make a mikveh there. How much rain do you get there? Mm-hmm. So the Jewish people always first took care of a mikveh before a shul. A shul you can have in your living room. You don't have to build a shul, building a separate building where you can daven. But a mikveh, what are you going to do?
Swimming pool.
Yeah.
No.
That may not work. No.
That has to be built properly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So far we've seen some of the requirements, some of the basics concerning mikvois for a human being, for an individual. Tfilas kelim, however, is a little bit different. With tfilas kelim, the Rishonim are pretty much in agreement. That even midrabanan, a mayon, a spring does not need 40 sel for tvilas kelim. That even midrabanan, it's not a requirement. That it would be sufficient the Kosher. As far as buying kelim from a goy, that was being toivel kelim from the tumah. But as far as buying kelim from a goy, the Smart says that we need 40 sel even in a mayon, because we learned it out from the same pasuk. Ach b'mei Niddah yischato. The Chazal were dorish that that's how do you make that? How do you make it tor? Chazal dorish in the water where Niddah is toiveles. In that water is 40 sel. So for kelim that's bought from a goy, we are machmir to require 40 sel, even if it's a mayon. And the Shuchan Aruch is passes in Siman Kuf Chav, not here. That's exactly what's needed. The Tur says that the Gabet Tfilas Kelim that's bought from a goyim, a mayon will be metar b'chol shehu. But it seems like everybody else pretty much just says that we need 40 sel. Well, what about Tfilas Odom? What are we going to do with Tfilas Odom in a mayon? We said that a mikveh requires 40 sel, but what about a mayon? A mayon that we learned that has the advantage that sometimes it really is sufficient to just kosherhu a little bit of water. You don't need 40 sel. Will that be also true by an odom? So it's a machlokes rishonim. Rambam and the Ravid hold a mayon mitaher odom b'chol shehu, as long as his goof is completely covered. That's the only condition. Rambam and Ravid hold that the mayon is b'chol shehu. The Balatoises holds that for Tfilas Odom, a mayon is not b'tayr b'chol shehu, you need 40 se'ah. This Yosef brings down also from the Rashba that one should be machmir in the Isur chorus to require 40 se'ah, and that's how the Shuchan Aruch paskins. Some say that it's Doraisa, but it appears from the Rosh that he holds that the Mem se'ah here is the Rabbanon. In other words, with the Doraisa it would be b'chol shehu, but with the Rabbanon you need 40 se'ah. Okay. From the Gemara, it's also in Psachim, it's also in Nazir, it's mevur there that as far as kelim, you could be toivel kelim b'revi'is mayim. A revi'is mayim would be sufficient. Min Torah. And it's only with the Rabbanon that they required 40 se'ah. Okay. So in other words, so even in kelim, the requirement of 40 se'ah is only with the Rabbanon. But as far as Tfilas Odom, the Tfilas Odom is 40 se'ah min Torah. That's what appears to be Rashi, what Rashi says in Tosfos in the Ravid. So the question is whether that 40 se'ah is min Torah or min Rabbanon. But that is what is required today. Regardless, 40 se'ah. The Sheikh brings down over here, and we'll soon see it. We'll see the Mechaber inside. But the Sheikh brings down that don't think that this 40 se'ah is flexible. Even if you're missing a little bit, it's possible. Kosher. And even if the person's body, and even if the person is very short, he's a midget. And he doesn't need so much, because our opinion is that the whole idea of 40 CO is because that is the amount that covers an average human being. But what if he's small? No, even if he's small, you still need the 40 CO. Yeah. Also, as we will soon see inside, when it comes to mikvahs, we're going to be using calculations of an amma shocheket. Amma shocheket is an extended amma, and there was a little bit more spacious amma, or more spacious tefach. We're going to be using calculations that are a little bit more strict than the ordinary, because the shiurei Torah are always lehachmir. There is an opinion, by the way, if you're interested. I think it's the Bach, the Lavush, who hold that short people would not need that much water. But anyway, we don't follow that. Even though they say midrabbanan you need 40 CO, we hold that everybody needs the same thing.
But the condition is that it has to cover the body.
Yes, that's what's important.
So if there is 40 SAW, but someone goes in there and it doesn't cover the body at once.
No, it's not good, right? Okay, so maybe we'll see first the mechaber inside, and then we'll go on to, if we have time, to rivers.
It has to cover the body at once, right? It can't be partial.
Right, all at once.
How do we measure?
By the way, we're talking about that, since you mentioned it at once, there is an opinion, perhaps we'll mention it another time, that even if the waters are not, the amount of water is not there at once, but it's coming in, if you connect that whole stretch of water, it does amount to that, it's okay.
Wouldn't that be also by a mayan?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the mayan itself is already,
according to those opinions,
is already advantageous, even if there's no 40 SAW.
But according to the opinion that the mayan also needs 40 SAW, so that's the connection.
Oh yes, exactly, right.
How do you measure the mayan if it's constantly moving?
No, you would have to look at it to see if there's that much. And
the only way to measure it, you'd have to stop it so that you could measure it.
Or if you could somehow see.
You could, for instance, have a container that is being filled constantly.
Exactly.
And the mayan is constantly going out, and one end coming in on the other.
Yes.
And you can see it within the container how much is in there.
You'd have to figure out someone to do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's correct.
I think the Mishnah brings such an example.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. That's where it's taken from. Mm-hmm.
That's where the spoon is on the edge. And
yes, that's correct, yeah. Alright, so we'll just read the mechaber inside a little bit. Dina mikveh meimov, ena isha oilo vetumoso berechitzo bemerchas. A woman will not be released from the tumah just by bathing in the bathhouse. Even if all the waters in the world came on her, somehow she got a lot of water on her. Still, adayin hi betumah, so she will remain in her tumah. V'chayavim alei chores, and you will be chayav chores. Chaz v'shalom, if somebody was with her. Ad shetitbol kol gufa bebatz achas, until she immerses her entire body at once. The main mikveh, either in the waters of a mikveh, or mayan, or a spring. Sheyesh bohem mem se'ah, that contain 40 se'ah, because that's how we hold. That's the minimum. The shi'ura, and what's the shira of a mikveh or mayan, was that can contain that amount? Amal rul sholosh amos de meruba. In other words, as long as you have those dimensions, amal berum at the height of sholosh amos, the meruba, in other words, as long as you somehow have that square dimensions of what, or cubic dimensions, right? Because this is cubic here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah? Using an amo be'amo bas shishot fochim v'chetzi etzba. Oh, that's interesting. Shishat fochim v'chetzi etzba, you need 6 fochim plus a half an etzba, yes. Not 6 fochim, which is the usual amo. Here you need an extra chetzi etzba. Because we're machmir. Let's say it's wider, it's not so high. Also kosher, as long as she can cover her entire body at once. If you do the math, it should come out to mem dalet elef bekuf yud ches etzbois begoidel ve'oid chatzi etzba. 40 44,118 fingers of the goydel, ve'oid chatzi etzba, and an additional half a finger. So if you want the measurements, the math, the calculation in fingers, this is what it amounts to. This is what it has to come out to. Most people don't use this kind of measurement, fingers, but he gives it to you because this is what it has to come out to.
How many was that again?
44,118 and an additional chatzi etzba. What is chatzi etzba?
Here they calculate 41,418.
Yes. That's the original. That's the one he brings down in the Beis Yosef.
Mm-hmm.
It depends if you're using the chatzi etzba extra or not.
Nice.
Where are you taking that from?
This is the Shamim.
Right. So you will see they probably will bring down what he actually says here. Here he says 44,000.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they're just quoting what he says in the Beis Yosef. Yeah. Yeah, but that's the question they ask. He quotes a different total in the Beis Yosef because he's working with different numbers of what the dimensions will ultimately be. But here he's saying we're going to use a shisha tfochim b'chatzi etzba. If you look at the Shach goes through this question. It talks about the two measurements. בצורך שיהיה החריץ שבו המים גדול יותר משיעור זה. The charitz, the actual hole where she immerses herself in, has to be big enough. It has to be bigger than this shear. Because when she does immerse herself and the waters are diminished, are displaced, there has to remain 40 so. She's not taking a dive. But even if she does not taking a dive, even going in, depending on how big this place is, the waters can come out. Water is displaced unless the height of the mikveh is high enough where the waters will remain in the mikveh. But if not, some water is going to come out. So the hole has to be bigger than this shear, he says, in order to account for any displacement of water. Mm-hmm. Very simple. All right. Now what do we do about rivers? So just to give you a little bit of an overview about rivers. What is the problems of rivers? Well, we learned so far that a mayan has an advantage over a mikveh. Because a mayan can also be affected with zoichalin, the waters are moving, and technically a mayan is of course a higher level tahara because even b'chol shehu. Okay, we require 4 Yisrael, fine, but the mayan is better. With rivers there could be a problem because if you learn the sugya in the Gemara, you can see one thing that stands out clearly. There is this concern that if the river is going to get most of its water from rain versus from its own, what's from its own meaning? From its own spring, from its own banks, as the Gemara says, from its own body of water that continuously swells up because there's always water coming out from the ground and so forth, all kinds of places. There's always this concern that if there's more rainwater coming down into the river, and that rainwater can be more or greater in amount than the waters coming from the ground, from the river itself, then this cannot be a kosher mikveh. A mikveh has to be standing water. Okay? So the question is, can we use a river if there's this concern that it may be possible that there may be more rainwater, which is why the river has swollen, than the original waters of the river that are not rainwater.
Can you back up a moment?
Sure.
You said that the mikveh has to be standing water.
For a mikveh to be
But a mayan is not standing.
right.
A
A mayan does not have to be standing.
Right. So why if the mayan does not have to be standing,
Right.
then why are we worried about a river not being standing? I understand the rain issue.
Well, remember, a mikveh is rainwater, right?
Right.
Well, if you're going to get mostly rainwater into this channel, then it has to be standing.
Okay.
So as we're going to see in the Ramah, what do? I mean, if that's the case, I mean, you want to make an enclosure in that river where the waters are standing. But we'll look into it soon. For now, let me just tell you the Shitas in the Gemara. We have several Shitas. We have the Shita of Shmuel that says, Anahar mitrabe mikipei. The river usually grows from its own kifei. Kifei, some say, from its own banks, from its own sources, and not from the rain. And therefore, a river, especially the rivers that are always flowing throughout the year, have a din of mayan. Always. The majority, according to him, according to the sheet, the majority of the water is from its own banks, from its own source, not from rain. We have the Shita of Rab, which is the exact opposite, who disagrees. And he holds that the majority of the water of a river, at least can be, we make Shamim, from rain. And also, there's a Shita of Shmuel again, in the second part of the Gemara, that somehow he appears to contradict himself when he says that the water cannot become tohar, bezoichlin, in other words, the rainwater, unless it's the Euphrates in the days of Tishrei. In other words, you can't use, apparently, the waters. There's a tremendous amount of rain earlier on, except in the days of Tishrei. So, without having to get into all those shitas, it appears clear, however, that one should not use a river whenever there's a chashash, a concern that there will be a lot more rainwater. As the suffix goes, Shema yirbu hanoitfim ala zoichalim. There may be more noitfim. Noitfim is drops that will be in greater amount than the waters that are running through. And if that would be the case, that the noitfim are in greater amount than the waters coming through the zoichalim, it would have to be a mikveh, and it's not if it's a river. So everybody appears to agree on that one should not immerse in a mikveh if there's that chashash, that most of this water in this stream, and there are such places, that this river is dry, or almost dry most of the year, and all of a sudden during the rainy season, there's lots of water. You may even have seen something like that. So everybody's pretty much in agreement that if there's that chashash, you should not dip into a mikveh like that, into a river like that. Halacha le'maaseh, Rabbeinu Tam and the Rash, the Balatruma, the Smak, and others hold like Shmuel that you can always use the rivers. You basically don't usually have the chash of ribui noitfim, that you will have more rainwater than the waters that are natural to the river. Most of the Rishonim, the Ran, the Rosh, the Maharik, the Mordechai hold that Rabbeinu Tam was even matir, even if the rivers are overflowing their own banks. There's a lot of water, and obviously that's coming from snowmelt and from rain and from all kinds of things. But he's maskim, he's moide, that with naharos that disappoint, as they're called, narot achzevim, rivers that disappoint, that sometimes they dry out. If there is a river that sometimes is dry and sometimes not, that what is it? That you may not know where the source or where most of the water is coming from, that in this case, you don't immerse in them. So in those situations he would agree. But generally, a river, you don't have to worry about it. But there are those who answer in rivers. Ben Hananel, the Rif, the Reed, the Maram Rutenberg, the Rambam, the Rosh, who paskin like rock. Some say it's because of a gzera. There's different reasons why they pass like Rav. Some say there's a gzera of chardelit shel Shamim. Person may make a mistake and immerse in a current of rainwater that's coming down the mountain, and assume that this is okay, like zoichalim. And they will say that noitfim is metar the zoichalim. That all the noitfim that came down are metar in the zoichalim. In other words, there is such a chashash, there is such a concern that people might mistake a current of rainwater and say that that current of rainwater is okay as well, coming down the mountain. So because of that, or because of other explanations that the Rishonim give, they're machmer. Either way, lemaise, it appears that it would all really depend on the season and on the river. It could be that you have this river that most of its water is coming from its own source. We will see that from the Shuchan Aruch, it's much more that he asers rivers, and the Ramah is Mikvaot. But I think it would all depend on the river ultimately. But it all depends on the circumstances, because most women are not going to go to a river. But sometimes there's no choice, so you have to evaluate the situation. Is this a concern that sometimes this river is drying up, or not? If it's always flowing, there's always a lot of water even without the rains, then there shouldn't be any problem.
Well, wouldn't that explain the difference in the Mechaber and the Ramah? Because the Mechaber, where he lived, there were more waters, there were more seasonal rains.
Yes.
The Ramah was in Poland, where the rivers flew all year.
Yes.
So it makes sense that the Ramah would permit the rivers.
Yeah, so let's read it inside. Mei ma'ayan metaharin af bezochalin. Waters of a ma'ayan are metar even bezochalin. Pirush zochalin nimshachim v'holchim v'nam mechunasim. They're not sitting water, but they're always moving. So they're metar even bezochalin. Mei geshamim, rainwater ain't metarim elo beshborim. So here we have clearly the Halacha and Sif base. The rainwater, which is what you need for mikveh, cannot be matar unless it's beshborim, unless it's sitting there, sitting water. What's beshborim? Explains Pirush makom amok, a deep place. Shemitkansim b'mayim, a cavity of sorts where the waters are gathered. Nikra ashborim. It's called ashborim. Aval alidei tzchila psulim. But if these waters of a mikveh are being zochel, they're running, like a current. Poslim min Torah. He brings down that we hold that it's possible even in the Torah. Imhem lechud below mayan. If these are the only waters that are running, without a mixture of a mayan, plain rainwater, the zoichlin, if it's moving, would be possible min Torah. How you are zochalim min mayan mitarvim min anotim? What happens if you have a mixture of zoichalin water from a spring together mixed with noitfim, with rainwater that's coming down, which is shehem make shamim? What's noitfim? Make shamim, rainwater. Harei akol kemayan. That's okay. You have a mixture. It's all like a mayan. It's all like a spring. The chol dover. However, im rabu hanoitfim, if there's more noitfim ala zoichalin, there's more rainwater than the zoichalin. Or v'chein im rabu megeshamim al mei nahar. Or if you're talking about a river where there's more rainwater than the actual waters of the river, eina mitar in the zoichalin, that you can't use it bezoichalin ela be'ashboiren. You would somehow have to create an ashboiren of this water. You would not be able to immerse in this water that's running. The ocean, you won't have the problem. And there's enough water in the ocean.
The ocean never.
Yes. I mean, there's questions of tznius. You have to watch yourself. There's a little bit of a risk. You have to make sure somebody is there, and so forth. But that's the biggest mikveh in the world. So if you have that kind of a situation where you have more rainwater than the spring water, then it would have to be beshabor, and somehow you would have to contain the water. How? You would have to put in mapatz, you would have to enclose it. Somewhat, the waters, you would have to make some sort of enclosure, partitions or something, fence it off, a corner, where you could have the water sitting there. That's the only way to use that water. If these are the circumstances. Similar to this, similar to this, this is what you would have to do if you have this kind of circumstances in the river. that is mixed. You would have to somehow enclose it to create an ashboren, water that is sitting, enough achi kavu hamayim, until the waters are standing, and then you can immerse in them.
Well, I was thinking that he was known to do that for his daughters.
Yes.
He would always put mats.
Abuho de Shmuel, the father of Shmuel. Yeah, exactly. But over there's a question as to why he put the mats. Was it because of the mud?
Or because of tznius?
Or because of tznius? Or because of an enclosure? I think the Rambam says that was the reason he did it. Yeah. There's different reasons why he could have done that. But you're right, it makes sense that that's what he would have done it. But it's not so clear. But yes, that's what would be required. Comes along the Ramah and says, really, I mean, you should be strict if these are the circumstances that you see that there's a lot of rainwater, to be machmir. But others, sharakroim kosu v'yesh lahach mikishita sarav v'rosh v'siyosam. Aval yesh matirim, there are some more matir. Litbol ben aharis kol hashana, to immerse in a river an entire year, throughout the whole year. Af b'shas haksham, even during the time of the rainy season. V'achshara slogim, and even during the time of the snow melt. V'rabu ha'noitin, what will happen is that you'll have more noitin ala zoichlin. Why? How could this be? Mishum de ikar, because the main gidul nahar, according to them, the main source of water of the river is still Mimoka Mekoira, from its source. Even if you have a lot of rain, there are some who hold that it's okay. Tur b'shem Rabbeinu Tam, b'shem Rashi, Sefer Trumas, and that is why a lot of people have the custom in many places, b'mokom she'ein mikveh, in a place where there's no mikveh, to do that, to go to the river. What are you going to do? Be'ein limchois, don't protest against those who are lenient in this. They have on who to rely on. There are some shittas that allow this. Mihu, however, yeshli zoher militvo benahar hamithave legamre alidei geshamim. You should definitely be careful not to immerse in a river that is completely comprised of rainwater. And when there is no rainwater, ukshein geshamim, posek legamre, it's dry. Even though you may have other rivers that will spill into this river during the rainy season, and therefore it will become overflowed with water because of them. No, nevertheless, even since by on its own, when there is no rain, it stops. That means it doesn't really have any source of spring or water of its own. So since it stops with the time that there's no rain, also you would not be able to immerse in it if it's derech zechilosoi. In other words, as the water is running. Unless, of course, you figure out a way to contain the water, to make the water sit in one place. Then, of course, this water is 100% kosher water. It's rainwater. Remember, for a mikveh, you need rainwater. Eventually we'll talk about what if you have some water from the faucet, what if you have something called maim she'uvim, water that was drawn in a bucket, under what situations can you use it? Because here we're using natural rainwater coming naturally down without any human intervention. That's the whole idea of mikveh. However, it's contained, it's sitting, it's not zoichlim. So if you could somehow contain the river water, even it's plain rainwater, but it's zoichlein. If you can somehow be mekaveh this water in one location, then that's fine. Then you can use it as a mikveh. But if we talk about a river that never stops, you always have waters rushing through it. Even though during the time of the rain, it broadens and it overflows its banks because of the rain, the amount of rain. Still, there's always rain there a whole year. You can immerse yourself in any part of it. According to Lefi Svora Samakirin, according to the lenient opinion, Ulefi Mashinagu, and according to what the custom has been. So it's very clear from the Ramah that at least in situations where there is no mikveh, and when that river is flowing throughout the year, even though it does overflow its banks and it definitely grows when the rainy season comes, and you say, well, now there may be more rain now. No, we're not going to look at that, because the ikar source of that river is not the rainwater, but its own source, and that would be perfectly acceptable according to the many lenient opinions. Okay, we'll continue with the next week.